I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe my attention span is dwindling, but I feel like every year the Coke 600 just feels longer and longer than the previous year. But yeah, stock car racing's longest night has come to a close, and it ended with a bang. Let's talk about it. How's it going, everyone? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. You might notice my room's looking a little more bare than usual. Moving out later this week, so already packed some stuff away, but show will go on this summer. We got plenty of episodes planned. I'll just be moving all over the place. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That's not why you guys tuned in. We're going to talk about the Coca-Cola 600. It's a late night. It was a long race. I've been up since 8 a.m., watched most of the F1 race. It was okay. I'm just not really a fan of F1 style racing. Watched the Indy 500. Started out kind of slow in my opinion. A lot of pit road issues early on. But then the second half, and especially that final 15 lap sprint to the finish, was outstanding. I even watched the NASCAR Heat 3 season opener. I can't talk tonight. I'm going to try to do this episode in mostly limited takes so I don't have to spend hours into the night editing this. So I'm just going to kind of ramble. But I even watched the NASCAR thing. And then of course the Coca-Cola 600 was a 4-hour plus long event, 400 crazy laps, and it all came down to a final 5-lap scramble to the finish with a 4-wide pass for the lead, pass for the win. We're going to talk all about it. I'm going to talk about the racing as a whole, the event as a whole. I'm going to talk about the top finishers because there were some pretty crazy stories in this one. And then of course I'm going to put this race on the Groovie Gauge. It's typical late Sunday night, weekend episode. We got a lot to talk about. Let's do it, guys. So firstly, I want to talk about the Coke 600 as an event. This is the 60th annual Coca-Cola 600, so historic milestone for one of NASCAR's crown jewels. Crowd looked great. Charlotte Motor Speedway has removed seats in the last decade, but I still believe they seat around 100,000 people, and this place looked 90% full, so right there in NASCAR's hotbed. Really nice to see that thousands and thousands of people came out to this one. Attendance looked great. It actually looked better than last year's Coke 600. Of course, it's Memorial Day weekend, so NASCAR did their big military salute at the beginning, and they also stopped midway through this race after stage 2 for a brief moment of silence, which I actually thought was pretty cool. You know, they've been going for 200 laps, loud cars, lap after lap after lap, and then they just stopped. And it was like a brief kind of eerie stillness for 30 seconds or so, and that was actually kind of cool to see. It was neat to see that. It was unique, so I have no problem. I applaud NASCAR for trying something new. But ultimately, this weekend is always a huge day for motorsports. From Monaco in the morning, the Indy 500, probably the highlight of the day for most people, but then the Coke 600 in the evening. All very unique styles of racing, obviously 3 very different unique series all across the world. And at least from a NASCAR fan standpoint, it's one where I think a lot of outsiders are watching, are looking in. A lot of F1 fans, IndyCar fans that are, they're looking in at NASCAR during this weekend, and to see the Coke 600, I think for the most part live up to most people's expectations. We'll talk about that more at the end. Was a pleasant sight to me. Obviously the spectacle was great. If you're like a hardcore Formula 1 fan who just happened to be tuning into this NASCAR race, I think you'd be impressed with what you saw, or you'd at least have to respect it. And I think that's really cool. That's an important thing. So that was my big takeaway from this event as a whole. But now I want to talk about the top finishers. That's where I want to spend a lot of my time because there were some crazy stories in this one. We'll talk about the winner. We'll talk about the final restart. We'll talk about all of that. Let's do it. Martin Truex Jr. gets the win, a big win for him, his 3rd win of the season. He's right up there now with Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski at the top of the pylon. Now this was a very interesting race. Early on, in fact, 12 laps in, Erik Jones, Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota driver, blew a tire, smacked the outside wall. His day was done very early. Not too long afterwards, Matt DiBenedetto, another Toyota driver, JGR affiliate, also blew a tire and wrecked out. And then not too far after that, Martin Truex Jr., the eventual winner of this race, also cut a tire down. He made contact with the wall, not as bad as what Jones and DiBenedetto did, so he was able to continue and obviously go on to win this race. But early on, just in the first 60, 70 laps, we had 3 top Toyota teams cut tires down. And later in this race, Hamlin would cut a tire, so Joe Gibbs Racing and Toyota had a ton of tire issues throughout this race. That was the story early on. So to see Martin Truex Jr. bounce back from that, and even Kyle Busch, who actually really never had a tire issue, he was the one Gibbs Toyota driver to kind of get lucky in that sense, to see them come back and get great finishes was honestly surprising given how grim this race started for Toyota. But Martin Truex Jr.'s win was not without some minor controversies. Well, I don't know if minor is the right word. Earlier in this race, I think in stage 3, he dumped one of the BJ McLeod racing car, or the Rick Ware racing cars. Honestly blanking on which one it was. It was the 52 car. I could look up who drove that. It was a Bailey Curry. Sorry guys, it's late. I've watched like 1,200 miles of racing today, so bear with me. But yeah, Truex wrecked the 52 car early in this race. Obviously wasn't intentional, I don't think, but just kind of a misjudgment there. Definitely didn't make Truex look too good. And then later in this race, another thing that I think rubbed some fans the wrong way, on this final restart, which we'll talk about more here in a second, David Ragan, who actually ran really well all day long, stayed in the top 10 for much of this race, surprisingly, stayed out, took no tires, so he started on the front row alongside Ryan Newman, who was on 2 tires, and according to the Fox broadcast, Martin Truex Jr. spotter Clayton Hughes went up to and asked David Ragan's spotter whether or not they would move to the back, move to the rear, so that Truex could get a clean restart. And David Ragan's spotter was insulted by that, rightfully so, I understand. But a lot of fans were kind of upset with Truex. You know, Truex, I think, has kind of this reputation now for being kind of a whiner. He's very vocal when something doesn't go his way. He's a complainer. Nothing really wrong with that, but sometimes it'll rub people the wrong way, and I think it did in this case, him asking the 38 team to literally step aside with 5 laps to go. So a lot of fans were mad at that. Ultimately, if you look at this leaderboard, David Ragan ended up falling pretty far out of contention, so maybe Truex had a point. I'm not going to get on too much for at least asking. I mean, you can just ask. Well, it doesn't hurt to ask. But yeah, those little controversies definitely rubbed some fans the wrong way. But Martin Truex Jr. probably had the fastest car all night. Kyle Busch, his teammate, was also a top contender. He was those were the only Toyotas that didn't have any major tire issues in this race. And it once again proved, though, that Joe Gibbs Racing is at the top of the NASCAR world right now. Penske, you see they're finishing not too far behind. They're close. Penske's really close. But, the beginning of this year it was kind of Penske-Gibbs neck and neck. Gibbs has definitely edged ahead, and this is another race that proves it. Stewart Haas Racing, you'll notice, not really many of their cars in contention. I'd be a little concerned by that. Stewart Haas Racing, especially Almirola, Suarez, Bowyer, they've looked pretty much irrelevant, especially this week. They were not good at all. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on down this list a little bit. Joey Logano finished second, came on strong late in this race. Roger Penske, team owner, won the Indy 500 for the 18th time earlier in the afternoon. So I thought for a moment there that, with the Blaney up there and Keselowski looked good until a spin late. I thought they might be able to get him the sweep. It would be the first time ever that an owner won both the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 in the same day. I thought for a second that was going to happen, but didn't. Still second place for Logano. He's right there. You look at these top 3, Truex, Logano, Kyle Busch, probably the 3 best drivers in NASCAR this year. And yeah, speaking of Kyle Busch, he had a crazy up and down day as well, from penalties to being caught a lap down, to, he avoided most of the tire issues that his teammates ran into, but he had a very eventful day. It looked like for a second he was going to be the one to drive off and win on that final restart, but then got trapped between Newman and David Ragan, lost his momentum, still recovered to finish 3rd. Chase Elliott carrying the banner for Hendrick Motorsports. Hendrick had a very up and down day. They had a lot of their cars in the top 10, then they'd fall out. Chase Elliott ultimately was able to lead some laps late in this race, was able to get the top 5 finish. Great for him. Continue that strong momentum. I think they have, 4 straight top 5s now for that 9 car, including that win back at Talladega. So definitely a big time, a good roll for the 9. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. finishes 5th. Great day for Roush Fenway. I knew Newman fell back a little bit after taking those 2 tires on that final stop, but both he and Ricky Stenhouse, the 2 Roush cars, were up in that top 10 for a lot of the later stages of this race. They really got better as it went into the evening. Ricky Stenhouse also came back from a spin earlier in this race when he got spun by Kyle Busch. Again, kind of like the Truex thing. I don't think Kyle Busch was fully to blame. Stenhouse was kind of loose, sliding around. But yeah, could have ended Stenhouse's day, but he came back from that to finish 5th. Really impressive. Chris Buescher's run really well at a few of the mile and a halves this year, especially by past JTG standards. He had a great restart at the end there to work his way up to 6th, which was probably the highest he really ever was today. So kudos to him. Then you see the other 3 Hendrick Motorsports cars, all 4 of them in the top 10. Even Alex Bowman, the fact that he had a tire issue and actually hit the wall late in this race, didn't bring out a caution, but he was saved by a caution, I guess. Still, the fact that he came back from that damage. William Byron started up near the front, on the pole as a matter of fact. Jimmy Johnson up there as well. Really good to see Hendrick continue the good trends after after that off weekend a few weeks ago. They've been on fire and they are showing no signs of slowing down. And then we get to some of the Stewart Haas guys like Harvick and Eric Almirola. Harvick was the only Stewart Haas driver that looked like maybe he was a top 5 contender. And even he faded late. They were talking on the Fox broadcast. They were throwing like 8 rounds of wedge into it or something crazy. Like Kevin Harvick did not have a good night, and he still was the best Stewart Haas Racing car. I'd be a little concerned now. Stewart Haas Racing is not getting better, it seems. They've, at best, stayed about the same as they've been all year, which is maybe 3rd best team in NASCAR, but they're falling further and further behind Penske and Joe Gibbs, who continue to one-up each other and basically extend that gap between them and the rest of the field. Stewart Haas Racing has gone from the best team in NASCAR last year, and it probably wasn't even that close, to 3rd, maybe 4th best this year. And that's a little bit concerning. I'm going to blow through some of these other guys. Corey LaJoie had a very quiet night, but a 12th place finish should not go unnoticed for that small team, Go Fast Racing. I mentioned Ryan Newman. He had a good performance as well as his teammate. And then David Ragan, I mentioned also, ran in the top 10 for most of this evening. Thought he was going to have a season-making night. Ultimately, pit strategy probably didn't work his way, ended up finishing 16th, but not terrible still. Solid performance for front row. Not pictured though are guys like Erik Jones, who finished dead last. Really tough day for him as far as points are considered. Another night probably not of his doing. I think Joe Gibbs Racing Toyota, as it looks like, had something go wrong with their tire pressure setups for this race, and that caused several of those Toyotas to cut tires down very early on tonight. So I don't fault Erik Jones, but man, playoff picture for him starting to look concerning. He's going to need to string together some good finishes to make sure he makes the playoffs, which I think he's capable of doing. Austin Dillon also finished outside the top 30. He was involved in a wreck, so was Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson, after a couple good finishes in a row at like Dover, Kansas, and then of course winning the All-Star race last weekend, Kyle Larson, reality kind of checked back in here. Ran pretty well tonight, was up in the top 5, contending for the lead at a couple different points, but late in this race he spun out, collected Austin Dillon, Clint Boyer, a few others were involved in that wreck, and ultimately it just showed again why Kyle Larson, you just can't trust him this year, man. I definitely think this aero package at these intermediate tracks does not suit Larson's driving style. He comes from dirt, like World of Outlaws, where it's low downforce, high horsepower. We're running the exact opposite of some of these tracks in NASCAR. Instead we have high downforce and low horsepower, so it's kind of the exact opposite from what Larson's used to driving. So I don't blame him for struggling a little bit this year, but he also struggled last year a little bit. I know he had some second place finishes, but he wasn't a threat in the playoffs. Kyle Larson's been on kind of just a not so great downward spiral the last 8 or 10 months. The win in the All-Star race I thought was finally like, hey, he's back, he's getting back in a groove. But then we come to the Coke 600 and he has these issues. And in the wreck, he just got loose. He just lost control of the car and spun out in front of everybody. So it was his fault. The car was probably not to his liking, but it was his fault. I tweeted this out, and I don't know if it's necessarily true, but it does raise a concern about Kyle Larson. He comes from these sprint car racing backgrounds. Sprint races, short races, 30 minutes long, less sometimes, sprint races. I'm not sure if these Coke 600 milers, these 4+ hour races, really suit his driving style. You think about it, the only race he's won in the last year and a half was the All-Star race, a 90-lap feature. So I'm not saying there's anything really to that. Obviously, there are other past dirt sprint car drivers who have had great careers in NASCAR, so I'm not saying that's an obvious correlation, but I do think it's something that could be mentioned maybe as to why Larson has struggled a little bit more than I think we expected. For years since he's been in the Cup Series, he's been kind of touted as like the next big thing. I mean, even 2014 when he was a rookie, next big thing, Kyle Larson. And he had flashes, just like in dirt racing and stuff, where you have flashes of crazy moments. Larson has some flashes where he looks amazing. But is he really capable of putting together 500 miles consistently every week? I don't know. I don't know if he really is. I don't know if he's really suited for that type of racing, but I'm just throwing that out there, not sticking by it, not out here saying it's truth or anything, but I thought I'd raise that point. He still races dirt races. I think this last week he raced dirt races. He raced in a sprint car. So Kyle Larson, I don't know. I just don't know if he's really suited for these NASCAR races long term, but I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. There's probably a lot more I could talk about from tonight's race. I'll probably go back and realize I forgot something important that I wanted to discuss, but in a nutshell, those are the top stories, those are the top finishers, obviously. It's been a long day of racing, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. Let's move on to the final segment of tonight's show, the Groovie Gauge. Ooh, yeah, there it is. Let's talk about this for a second. So NASCAR has been on a roll lately with their mile and a halfs, which is what this 2019 Radical Aero package, that's what it was built for. It was built for the mile and a halfs, and starting with Texas, a couple months ago, which was the best Texas race we've seen since the repave, since the reconfiguration. That race was a success. Then we went to Kansas a couple weeks later, and that was an incredible race, most of us agree. And then we go to the All-Star race last weekend, and it was another incredible race. The Open included incredible racing. So this mile and a half package has been on a roll lately, and I was really worried with the 600 miles this race being more of a marathon. I thought maybe we'd struggle. It was hot temperatures, not sure. But no. Racing was still fantastic, and we saw it shone through perfectly as we got later into the night, especially when the track cooled, it got even better. That's what led to a crazy 4-wide pass for the lead on the final restart. This is the 4th straight mile and a half race where this aero package has come out on top, and I think has proven to be a success. And I just think, I'm just documenting that because I think that's where a lot of fans stand right now, and I think NASCAR should take note. We've heard them say this week that this aero package is definitely going to play a factor into their Gen 7 plans, and I still think if you're heavily against this package, if you really want something or don't want a certain thing, let NASCAR know. But I think NASCAR is looking at the success they've seen these last 4 weeks at the mile and a half, and I think they're taking that to heart, and I think they rightfully should. I don't love low horsepower racing like this. I don't love high downforce. I don't love higher corner speeds necessarily, at least in my soul I don't love it. But my eyes can't deny the exciting racing I've seen the last month and a half on these tracks. I mean, we had a 4-wide pass for the lead, and that wasn't the only 4-wide tonight. Pretty much every restart saw 4-wide somewhere in the pack, but the last restart of the night obviously stole all my attention. NASCAR's emphasizing the show with this aero package, and as we've seen the last 4 weeks, it really feels like when push comes to shove, a lot of the fan base really kind of loves the show more than they care about how it's created. I know it's not everybody. I know in a perfect world we'd go back to the kind of horsepower and downforce and everything we had in 2004 or 2002 or something like that, and we'd still get the kind of racing we have now. But I just don't think that's very realistic. I think you either can have the racing we have now with this kind of wacky package, or you can go back to what it looked like in 2004 or 2012 or something like that, and not exactly sure what that racing is going to look like in modern day, in the modern era. It's a game NASCAR is going to have to play not only with itself, but also with the fan base, the drivers, the sponsors, the manufacturers. There's a lot of people they have to answer to, and I think a lot of people want something slightly different. So I don't know, let your voice be heard, of course. If you really like the racing you've seen so far this year at the mile and a half, let them know what you like about it. If you really haven't liked the racing, or if you really want a certain aspect back in 2021 or whenever we see the Gen 7, let them know, tweet at them. If they do fan surveys, let them know. But personally, every week we see this package, I'm falling more and more in love with it at the mile and a halves. Still don't love it at Dover, don't love what it did to Martinsville, don't love necessarily what it did to Bristol, although Bristol was still fantastic in my opinion. But at the mile and a halves, this thing continues to win me over week after week. They mentioned several times during this broadcast, I think during Stage 3, which was the only kind of lackluster portion of this race. Stage 1 was great, a lot of little spins, tire issues led to some crazy restarts. Stage 2 was okay. Stage 3 was kind of a dud. Kyle Busch led for a while, then Truex led for a while, and it was just not a lot of competitiveness up front. Stage 4 was pretty fantastic with that great final restart. But overall, this race, I think it's a very positive score. They mentioned during, I think, Stage 3 that this race at that point already had more lead changes and leaders than any of the past like 4 or 5 Coke 600s ever. Not saying that necessarily makes a good race, but I do think it often correlates that way. As far as the Groovie Gauge, I know I've rambled for quite a bit here. As far as the Groovie Gauge is concerned, I got to give this Charlotte Coca-Cola 600, the 60th running, I'm going to give it a solid 85% on this here Groovie Gauge. Great day to wrap up, the greatest day in motorsports. I think it represented NASCAR well. I think it showed not only the greatest things about this aero package, but also just about NASCAR racing in general. We saw pit strategy, we saw a few spins here and there, we saw some carnage, we saw underdogs running up towards the front, we saw superstars battling it out at the end with making impressive moves, daring moves. This race had a little bit of everything as per usual. Honestly, one of the biggest knocks against this race is the fact that it was 4 hours and like 15 minutes long. And it's hard for me to hold that against it. It's a 600-mile race, but I don't know, maybe I'm just tired. I've watched a lot of racing today. I know a lot of you guys have probably watched a lot of racing today too, but I did feel like, especially in Stage 3, this race was dragging a little bit. But that being said, it was still fantastic. I was still on the edge of my seat for the final restart, and I think it was great. Left a good taste in my mouth, and hopefully it did for a lot of you fans watching as well. So there's my Groovie Gauge. Let me know down below in the description what you think of today's race. Did you like it? Did you hate it? As usual, I look forward to reading your responses. Ooh, I love uploading these episodes late at night, man. My sleep schedule is woohoo. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram. You can check out the t-shirts I have for sale down in the description. Check those out. Supports me, supports the show. I really appreciate it. And of course, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Michael Harrison at G was the Stars, SelfishGifts.com, Mentally Effective, Cameron James, John Koblenz, Jason R. Long, Wesley Donaldson, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, MyFantasyRace.com, TheRacingInsiders.com, Matthew Koulopoulos, and the rest of these amazing Patreon supporters. I couldn't do this without the support I get from all of you guys. So thank you so much for supporting me, supporting the channel, and supporting what we're doing over here. I appreciate it a lot. Again, thanks everyone for watching. Yes, with me moving out, things are going to be kind of weird, different for the next couple months, but the shows will continue virtually untouched, just be in different locations from time to time. But thank you guys for supporting me. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll be back later this week. I got some exciting episodes this planned. Don't want to spoil anything just yet, but I might have some pretty high-profile guests appearing in the next few days. So I think you guys are going to be excited about that. I know I sure am. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you very, very soon. Have a good rest of your weekend. Happy Memorial Day.